Allies should intervene when they witness scenes of discrimination. This can make a huge difference for people being attacked and shows that we won't stand for any form of hate or discrimination. When marginalized groups stand up for themselves, they're often ignored. So allies are needed to prevent situations from escalating and further harming the victims. Too many people sit by in silence and think that it's not their responsibility to speak up, but it is. You would want someone to speak up for you if you were being harassed or attacked. We should also try to use different terminology than allyship because this is really passive. Instead, try to use words like solidarity, accomplice, advocate, or co-conspirator because this is more active. There's a huge difference between doing no harm and doing good. When you witness discrimination and do nothing, that is in itself violence. Allies need to be more active and use their privilege to make safe spaces for all identities. If you claim to be an ally but don't speak up when you see people being harassed due to their identity, you're not really a true ally. People think they can do the bare minimum of not discriminating against people and that that's enough, but it's not. We need to show our support for marginalized groups through our actions, not just the posts that we make online or the research we've done about marginalized identities. In a world where hate, discrimination, and oppression is embedded in our history and our institutional policies, research isn't enough. It's a great start, but we need more to actually promote change. Start slowly and you'll see the impact that you can make on the world for the better. The authors gave a really great example of a white ally who headed a diversity, inclusion, and racial equity committee for her job at a charity organization. She didn't consult people of color, but instead used online resources because she was thinking that allyship shouldn't burden others with the work of advocacy. Despite good intentions, after the meeting, people of color informed her that she should have consulted with the people she was trying to help. It can be really challenging to balance when to use privilege to do the work so marginalized people don't have to, or when you should use your privilege to work with marginalized groups to amplify their messages and voices. The authors introduced a principle called the Platinum Rule. This modifies the commonly known Golden Rule, which is treat others how you wish to be treated, and instead moves towards embracing that the other person is not like you in many ways. It says to help others as they wish to be helped and takes into account that the other person's wants and needs need to be addressed in order to make sure that you're actually amplifying the correct message. For me, as someone with a disability, I've often had issues where people try to advocate for me and my disability accommodations without including me in the conversation. And although this may seem helpful from an outsider, it doesn't actually help me, and it doesn't make it so I have to do less work. It instead made it so the accommodations that I received were not actually helpful to me and my disability. The people helping had good intentions, but they didn't know enough about me and my disabilities to speak on my behalf. It led to me having to do more work in order to try to fix their mistakes, but unfortunately it was cemented as my only disability accommodation option. Good intentions aren't enough. Advocates should try to amplify the voices and messages of marginalized people and check in with them before they do that advocacy. If there's no checking in, this makes the efforts follow this white savior complex, where white individuals feel the need to speak up and do actions that they think will help people of color in order to be a savior. This is rooted in the belief that these marginalized groups can't do it themselves and they need someone to protect them because they're not good enough. It makes the advocacy more about that white person and the good they intend to do, and less about the needs of the people that are being marginalized, since they're not being consulted. And oftentimes it can interrupt the voices of marginalized groups as they try to speak for themselves. Advocates should amplify the voices of marginalized groups, not become those voices. One example is missionary groups, where they go to other countries and try to save them using their privilege. These people spend massive amounts of money to go to that other country and are often unqualified to do the work that they're trying to do. They can help build homes and wells for impoverished communities without having a background in those fields. This means the work probably won't be done properly, and it also doesn't really do anything to help the communities so they can help themselves after that 1 week. It wastes money that could have been instead spent to give supplies to that community, or they could have been taught to do that work if they didn't already know how to. Spending thousands of dollars to have that 1 week of work so you can take pictures and boast about how good you are isn't advocacy. It mainly serves you and not the people that need help. It makes you feel good about yourself, thinking that you made a difference when there's really not much of a difference made. When put in a situation where you can be an ally, try to think, am I making this more about myself than about the people I'm trying to help? Try to do allyship in a way where you don't care whether or not you receive praise from others, and just do the work in order to make a better society, not just to look good or gain the trust of marginalized communities. This also helps prevent fatigue with advocacy work, because if you're not given that praise, you still feel good because you're doing good. Don't do advocacy to show that you're one of the good ones. Do it because it's right and will help others. Sometimes allies worry that it's not their place to speak up, so they remain a witness to oppression. In these situations, try to think if the person in hand would actually want your help. Far too often, marginalized groups get unsolicited help, despite the fact that there's no evidence that that's needed. For me, this looks like people coming up to me in the grocery store when I'm with my service dog and asking about my medical conditions, then saying, "I'll pray for you." I don't need your prayers, I'm doing fine just on my own. All this does is show that you pity me, which makes me feel worse about myself. Try to only intervene if you see signs that the person wants help. If you see an instance of discrimination where a person of color speaks out about what's being said to them, don't butt in. But if you see someone being discriminated against where they're clearly uncomfortable, or if their speaking out has done no good in de-escalating the situation, then you should speak out. Try to wait for the proof that the victim needs help. A good example that the authors provided was in a meeting, one of the staff commented that the most beautiful women in the university were in his department. Someone saw that women were uncomfortable, and he chose to speak up in a way where he showed his discomfort in that situation as opposed to trying to speak on someone else's behalf. He said, "I'm concerned that in this day and age, such comments about women are still being made." This is really great because he spoke up about situations where he could see people were uncomfortable, but didn't try to put words in other people's mouths. He spoke about how it impacted him and how the situation was wrong. If you're unsure if your help is needed in a situation, it doesn't hurt to ask the marginalized individual or group being affected. Sometimes members of marginalized communities don't feel comfortable asking for help, so always just try to look out for the signs of someone struggling and politely ask if they need help. Try to offer it in a less intrusive and embarrassing way than them having to speak up themselves. Worst case scenario, they say no and there's no harm done, and it just shows that you care. If someone asks for help, try to give them help that they ask for and not the help that you think they deserve. The authors provide an example that I really liked of a question asked during a psychology study. A blind woman was walking to work and her usual route had to be changed because of construction, and she asked someone if the bus stop was 1 block away. The person told her it was too dangerous for her to be walking on her own and walked her to the bus stop. A second person told her it was too dangerous for her to be walking alone and told her to go home. When asked which pedestrian was more helpful, sighted participants thought that taking the woman to the bus stop was better. Blind individuals thought that both were equally inappropriate. Neither person gave the help that she asked for. She only asked if the bus stop was a block away. She was perfectly capable of getting to that bus stop on her own with her cane. She just asked for confirmation of the location. Both people assumed she couldn't walk on her own because they don't know how her disability impacts her. People with disabilities adapt and learn ways to do things on their own. They don't know what these marginalized groups need. When you ask people if they need help, don't speak down to them. If you ask someone in a demeaning way, they're probably going to say no even if they needed your help. Don't make it performative. One example is the Pepsi commercial where Kendall Jenner was shown at a Black Lives Matter protest and gave police a can of Pepsi, which stopped the conflict. This is really insulting for the people risking their lives to protest systemic police violence against people of color, and it actually didn't do anything or help anyone. It's performative.